The thunder rolled across the New Mexico territory as Patrick Jameson stared at the roaring waters of the Rio Grande. The bridge to Socorro now a treacherous path no sane man would attempt to cross. Yet there she stood on the opposite bank, Olivia Winters, the schoolteacher who had arrived just 3 months ago, clutching her sodden skirts as the rain pounded mercilessly against her slender frame. "Miss Winters," Patrick shouted over the deafening storm, "stay where you are. I'm coming to get you." The year was 1878, and Socorro was still establishing itself as more than just another dusty settlement in the territory. Patrick had been born and raised in these parts, his calloused hands and sun-weathered face telling the story of a life spent under the unforgiving western sky. "Mr. Jameson, please. It's too dangerous," Olivia called back, her voice barely audible over the crash of water against wood. But Patrick was already guiding his horse, a sturdy palomino named Sundance, into the rising waters. He had seen this bridge withstand floods before, but never one quite like this. The wooden planks groaned beneath Sundance's hooves as they inched forward, the water now lapping at his stirrups. Olivia watched in horror and admiration as the cowboy navigated the treacherous crossing. She had come to Socorro with dreams of independence and purpose after leaving behind a comfortable but stifling life in Boston. At 24, she had shocked her family by accepting a teaching position in the territory, determined to make her own way in the world. Patrick reached the far bank and dismounted, water streaming from his duster. "Miss Winters," he said, tipping his hat despite the absurdity of such formality in their current predicament. "Seems you're in need of assistance." "The stage left me here," she explained, gesturing helplessly at her trunk, now half submerged in mud. "The driver said the bridge would hold, but by the time I gathered my courage, the waters had risen." Patrick glanced back at the bridge, which was now visibly straining against the force of the flood. "We don't have much time. Leave your things. I'll send some boys to fetch them once the water recedes." "But my books," Olivia protested, "will be no good to Socorro if their teacher drowns trying to save them," Patrick finished firmly. "Come now." Without waiting for further argument, he lifted her into his arms. Olivia gasped at the sudden contact, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. He was stronger than any of the gentleman callers who had pursued her in Boston. "Hold tight," he instructed, mounting Sundance with surprising grace despite his burden. Olivia pressed her face against his chest as they began the perilous journey back across the bridge. Halfway across, a terrible cracking sound split the air. Olivia screamed as the bridge shuddered beneath them. "We'll cross everything together," Patrick said, his voice steady despite the danger. "This flood, this bridge, whatever else life throws our way." The words struck Olivia as oddly intimate coming from a man she barely knew, yet they calmed her racing heart. She clung tighter as Sundance picked up speed, responding to Patrick's urgent commands. They reached solid ground just as a section of the bridge gave way behind them, crashing into the churning waters below. Patrick didn't stop until they were well away from the river's edge, finally setting Olivia down beneath the shelter of an overhanging rock. That was. Olivia struggled to find words adequate to the experience. "Just another day in Socorro," Patrick finished with a smile that transformed his rugged face. It was in that moment, soaked to the bone and trembling with residual fear, that Olivia first truly noticed Patrick Jameson not as the quiet cowboy who occasionally tipped his hat to her in town, but as the man who had risked his life to save hers without hesitation. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were insufficient. "My pleasure, Miss Winters." He removed his duster and draped it over her shoulders. "Now let's get you somewhere warm and dry." As they rode double on Sundance toward town, Olivia couldn't help but wonder if the flood had washed away more than just the bridge that day. Socorro was abuzz with activity the following morning as the townsfolk assessed the damage from the storm. The bridge would need to be rebuilt, and several farms along the river had suffered significant losses. Patrick found himself volunteering to lead the recovery efforts, partly out of civic duty and partly because it gave him a legitimate reason to check on the schoolteacher. He found Olivia at the schoolhouse, attempting to salvage what she could of her classroom after the roof had sprung a leak during the downpour. "Good morning, Miss Winters," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "I see you've had some trouble here as well." Olivia looked up from the soggy books she was carefully laying out to dry. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her smile was genuine. "Mr. Jameson, I didn't expect to see you today. I assumed you'd be busy with more important matters than a leaky schoolhouse." "Everyone's pitching in where they can," he replied, stepping further into the room. "And I'd say education is pretty important to Socorro's future." "That's very progressive of you," Olivia remarked, a hint of surprise in her voice. "Not everyone in town shares your view." "Sheriff Matthews suggested just yesterday that teaching girls anything beyond basic arithmetic was a waste of resources." Patrick's jaw tightened. "Sheriff Matthews has many opinions that I don't share," he said diplomatically. "May I?" He gestured to the roof, where water was still dripping through in several places. "Please. I'd be most grateful for any assistance." Patrick spent the better part of the morning repairing the schoolhouse roof, acutely aware of Olivia moving about below him. They worked in companionable silence, occasionally broken by conversation about the town, the weather, and the progress of her students. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Jameson," Olivia said as they shared a simple lunch of bread and cheese that she had brought. "Oh. And what did you expect from a Socorro cowboy?" Patrick asked, genuinely curious. Olivia blushed slightly. "To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps someone less thoughtful. I've noticed how you help Mrs. Reynolds with her groceries and how you always have a kind word for the Wheeler children, even though most people in town avoid them because of their father's reputation." It was Patrick's turn to be surprised. "You've been paying attention." "A teacher observes," she said simply. "It's part of the job. And what else have you observed during your time in Socorro?" He found himself genuinely interested in her perspective. Olivia considered the question seriously. "I've observed that this place is full of contradictions. There's harshness and beauty in equal measure. People who would give you their last crust of bread, and others who would take it from your mouth. Not so different from Boston in that respect, I suppose, though the trappings are certainly less refined." "And which category do I fall into?" Patrick asked, his voice lighter than he felt. Olivia met his gaze directly. "I believe you're a good man, Mr. Jameson, and good men are rare enough anywhere that one takes notice." The simple declaration warmed him more than he cared to admit. They finished their meal in silence, both aware that something had shifted between them. As Patrick prepared to leave, having made the roof as watertight as possible with the materials at hand, Olivia stopped him at the door. "There's to be a social at the church this Sunday," she said hesitantly, "to raise funds for those affected by the flood. That is, I would be pleased if you would consider attending." Patrick smiled, his heart beating a little faster. "I believe I will, Miss Winters. Thank you for the invitation." He rode away with a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the clearing skies above Socorro. The church social was a modest affair by Eastern standards, but for Socorro, it represented a significant community effort. Tables laden with home-cooked dishes lined the churchyard, and someone had brought out a fiddle to provide music for dancing. Patrick arrived later than he intended, having been delayed by a dispute between two of his ranch hands. He spotted Olivia immediately, standing with Reverend Foster and his wife near the punch bowl. She wore a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. He was about to approach when he noticed the man standing too close to Olivia's side, Thomas Caldwell, the banker's son, who had recently returned from schooling back east. The young man was leaning in, speaking animatedly, one hand resting possessively on Olivia's elbow. Patrick hesitated, suddenly feeling out of place in his clean but well-worn clothes. Caldwell represented everything he was not: educated, wealthy, connected to the kind of world Olivia had left behind. What could Patrick Jameson, with his small ranch and calloused hands, offer a woman like her? He was about to turn away when Olivia looked up and saw him. The smile that lit her face dissolved his doubts, and he found himself moving toward her almost without conscious decision. "Mr. Jameson," she greeted him warmly, discreetly stepping away from Caldwell's touch. "I'm so pleased you could join us, Miss Winters." Patrick nodded, then acknowledged the others. "Reverend Mrs. Foster, Caldwell, Jameson," Thomas replied coolly. "Didn't expect to see you at a church social. Cattle business must be slow." Patrick ignored the jab. "The flood affected everyone in Socorro. It's only right we all do our part to help." Olivia looked between the two men, sensing the tension. "Mr. Jameson has already done a great deal," she said. "He rescued me from the far side of the bridge during the worst of the storm, and he repaired the schoolhouse roof just yesterday." "How gallant," Caldwell remarked with a thin smile, "though I'm sure any man would have done the same." "But they didn't," Olivia replied pointedly. "Mr. Jameson did." She turned to Patrick with a warm smile. "In fact, I was just telling Reverend Foster about your heroism. I believe he'd like to acknowledge your efforts." Before Patrick could protest, Reverend Foster was pulling him away to meet other community members, leaving Olivia alone with Thomas Caldwell once more. Patrick glanced back to see Caldwell leaning in again, speaking earnestly to Olivia, who was now looking less comfortable. The next hour passed slowly for Patrick, as he was drawn into conversations about bridge reconstruction and flood damage. He kept Olivia in his peripheral vision, noting how she skillfully navigated the social currents of Socorro's small society. She was gracious with everyone, from the wealthiest rancher's wife to the children who tugged at her skirts. When the fiddler struck up a livelier tune, Patrick finally found his opportunity. He approached Olivia, who had momentarily escaped Thomas Caldwell's attentions. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Winters?" he asked, extending his hand. Olivia's face brightened. "With pleasure, Mr. Jameson." As they joined the other dancers, Patrick was acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected. His hand at her waist, her fingers resting lightly on his shoulder, their palms pressed together. She moved with natural grace, following his lead as though they had danced together 100 times before. "I believe Mr. Caldwell is somewhat put out by your choice of dance partner," Patrick observed as they turned past the banker's son, who was watching them with barely concealed displeasure. Olivia glanced in Caldwell's direction and then back to Patrick. "Mr. Caldwell seems to labor under the misapprehension that shared geography makes us natural companions. He has spent the last hour telling me all about Boston and how much I must miss civilization." "And do you?" "Miss civilization, that is?" Patrick asked, suddenly serious. Olivia considered the question as they continued to move with the music. "I miss certain aspects of it," she admitted. "Libraries and concerts, the changing of the seasons, but I don't miss the constraints. Here, I'm judged more by what I do than by my family connections or how well I pour tea." "Sakura can be harsh," Patrick warned, "especially for someone used to Eastern comforts." "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Jameson," she replied with a hint of challenge in her voice. "And I believe some things are worth enduring hardship for: freedom, purpose, the chance to build something meaningful." Patrick found himself captivated by her conviction. "You're unlike any woman I've ever met, Miss Winters." "I'll choose to take that as a compliment," she said, her eyes sparkling. "It was certainly intended as one." The dance ended too soon, and Patrick reluctantly released her as the music faded. Before he could suggest another dance, Thomas Caldwell appeared at Olivia's side. "I believe this next one is mine," he said smoothly, taking Olivia's hand without waiting for her response. Patrick stepped back, knowing that creating a scene would only embarrass Olivia. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Winters," he said, tipping his hat before walking away. He spent the remainder of the social on the periphery, watching as Olivia was claimed for dance after dance by various men of Sakura. She was unfailingly polite to each partner, but Patrick couldn't help noticing that her smile never quite reached her eyes the way it had when they had danced together. As the event wound down and families began to depart, Patrick saw his opportunity. Olivia was gathering her things, preparing to leave. "May I escort you home, Miss Winters?" he offered, approaching her just as Thomas Caldwell was making a similar proposal. Olivia looked between them, a flicker of amusement crossing her face at the predicament. "That's very kind of both of you," she said diplomatically. "But as Mr. Jameson's ranch lies in the direction of the schoolhouse where I'm staying, it would make more sense for him to accompany me." Caldwell's face tightened with barely suppressed anger, but he managed a stiff nod. "Another time, perhaps. Good evening, Miss Winters, Jameson." As they walked away from the church, Olivia released a small sigh. "I hope I haven't offended him too severely. It's a small town and I can't afford to make enemies." "Caldwell's bark is worse than his bite," Patrick assured her. "And his father values the school too much to let Thomas cause trouble for you. Old man Caldwell may be a hard businessman, but he's always maintained that education is what will bring prosperity to Sakura." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant calls of night birds and the soft thud of their footsteps on the dusty road. "Thank you for the dance," Olivia said finally. "It was the highlight of my evening." "Mine as well," Patrick replied honestly. "Though I fear I'm not as polished a partner as some of the other gentlemen." Olivia laughed softly. "Mr. Caldwell stepped on my toes twice, and Mr. Peterson was so concerned with appearing dignified that he barely moved at all. I much preferred your company." They reached the small building attached to the schoolhouse that served as the teacher's quarters. Patrick walked her to the door, suddenly reluctant to say good night. "Would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow?" he asked impulsively. "At my ranch. It's nothing fancy, but my housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, is an excellent cook." Olivia hesitated only briefly. "I would like that very much, Mr. Jameson." "Patrick," he said. "If you're willing, I'd prefer you call me Patrick." Her smile was worth any risk to his reputation or heart. "Then you must call me Olivia, Patrick." "Olivia," he repeated, savoring the way her name felt on his tongue. "Until tomorrow, then." He waited until she was safely inside before turning toward home, the night suddenly full of possibilities he hadn't dared consider before. Word of Patrick's dinner invitation to the schoolteacher spread through Sakura like wildfire. By midday, Mrs. Garcia had heard at least 3 different versions of the story, each more scandalous than the last. "People say you carried her across the flood in your arms," Mrs. Garcia said as she vigorously kneaded bread dough. "That you told her you would face all of life's challenges together." Patrick, who had been inventorying supplies for the bridge rebuilding, looked up in surprise. Good Lord, the way gossip travels in this town. Yes, I carried her across the bridge because it was collapsing beneath us. And I might have said something about crossing things together, but it was hardly a proposal of marriage. Mrs. Garcia raised an eyebrow. Yet here you are, inviting her to dinner at your home unchaperoned. You'll be here, Patrick pointed out reasonably. I am your housekeeper, not a proper chaperone. If you care for this young woman's reputation, I'll ride into town and invite Reverend Foster and his wife as well. Patrick conceded, recognizing the wisdom in Mrs. Garcia's concern. Will that satisfy the proprieties? The housekeeper nodded approvingly. It's a start. Now, what are you planning to wear? Not those work clothes, I hope. Patrick looked down at his serviceable but well-worn attire. What's wrong with these, Mrs.? Garcia's exasperated sigh told him everything he needed to know. Olivia, meanwhile, was facing her own interrogation from Sakura's curious residents. The mothers of her students were particularly interested in this development, stopping by the schoolhouse throughout the day with flimsy pretext for their visits. I hear Mr. Jameson's ranch is quite prosperous, Mrs. Wheeler remarked as she allegedly came to discuss her son's reading progress. Not as grand as the Caldwell estate, of course, but a respectable property, and he's a good man despite his unconventional background. His background? Olivia inquired, genuinely curious. Mrs. Wheeler lowered her voice conspiratorially. He was raised by his father alone after his mother passed, poor thing. And old Henry Jameson was a bit of a recluse. Some say he came west running from the law, though that's never been proven. Patrick grew up more wild than not, until he met Reverend Foster's predecessor, who took an interest in the boy's education. Olivia absorbed this information thoughtfully. It explained Patrick's surprising literacy and thoughtfulness, which seemed at odds with his cowboy exterior. Mr. Jameson strikes me as a man of character, she said carefully. Oh, indeed, Mrs. Wheeler agreed readily. There's not a person in Sakura who wouldn't vouch for his integrity. It's just, well, he's never shown interest in settling down. Many a local girl has set her cap for him over the years to no avail. We had all but given up hope of seeing Patrick Jameson married. Mrs. Wheeler, Olivia said firmly, I appreciate your concern, but I think you may be getting ahead of yourself. Mr. Jameson has invited me to dinner, not proposed marriage. The older woman patted Olivia's hand indulgently. Of course, dear. But in a place like Sakura, intentions become clear very quickly. Just be prepared for the attention. By the time Olivia finished her teaching day, she was second-guessing her acceptance of Patrick's invitation. She had come to Sakura to build a new life on her own terms, not to become the subject of town gossip or to rush into a relationship. Yet there was something about Patrick Jameson that intrigued her deeply, a complexity beneath his straightforward manner that called to her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the schoolhouse door. She opened it to find Patrick himself, looking uncommonly formal in a clean shirt and vest, his hat in his hands. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said, shifting slightly under her surprised gaze. I came to let you know that Reverend and Mrs. Foster will be joining us for dinner tonight. And to offer you a ride out to the ranch if you'd like. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Olivia's chest. That's very thoughtful. I'd be grateful for the transportation. Patrick seemed to read her conflicted emotions. Mrs. Garcia thought it best for your reputation, he explained quietly. Though I assure you my intentions are honorable. And what exactly are your intentions, Mr. Jameson? Olivia found herself asking, surprising them both with her directness. Patrick didn't look away. To know you better, he said simply. The rest, I believe, should unfold naturally, don't you think? His honesty was refreshing after Thomas Caldwell's practiced flattery. Yes, she agreed. I think that's a fine approach. The dinner party was a pleasant affair, with Reverend Foster regaling them with tales from his early days in the territory, and Mrs. Foster gently drawing out Olivia's stories of her journey west. Patrick spoke little but watched Olivia intently, noting how her eyes lit up when discussing her students or her plans for the school. Miss Winters has proposed expanding our library, Reverend Foster informed Patrick. She believes every child in Socorro should have access to books beyond the basic primers. It's an ambitious goal, Mrs. Foster added, especially given our limited resources. Books are essential, Olivia said passionately. They open worlds beyond our immediate experience. How else will our children dream of possibilities they've never seen? Patrick found himself nodding in agreement. My own life was changed by books, he admitted. Our previous reverend, God rest his soul, introduced me to everything from Shakespeare to scientific journals. I'd be a poorer man without that education, in ways that have nothing to do with money. Olivia looked at him with new understanding. What was your favorite? She asked. The Count of Monte Cristo, Patrick replied without hesitation. The idea that a man could reinvent himself, overcome injustice through perseverance and intelligence. It spoke to me. A fine choice, Reverend Foster approved, though perhaps a bit romantic in its view of vengeance. Says the man who reads penny dreadfuls when he thinks his wife isn't looking, Mrs. Foster teased, causing her husband to blush furiously. The conversation flowed easily from there, touching on literature, the progress of the bridge repairs, and the upcoming harvest festival. By the time dessert was served, Mrs. Garcia's exceptional apple pie, Olivia felt as though she had known these people for years, rather than months. After dinner, while Reverend Foster was engaged in conversation with Mrs. Garcia about her ailing sister, Patrick invited Olivia to see the view from the porch. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the landscape in brilliant golds and purples. It's breathtaking, Olivia said softly, leaning against the porch railing. This land has a way of surprising you, Patrick replied, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth without actually touching. Just when you think you understand its harshness, it shows you something of such beauty that it steals your breath. Olivia turned to find him looking not at the sunset but at her. The intensity in his gaze made her heart quicken. Patrick, she began, uncertain of what she wanted to say. He saved her from having to decide. I'm glad you came tonight, he said simply, and I hope you'll come again. I'd like that, she replied, equally simple. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the last light faded from the sky, revealing a canopy of stars more brilliant than any Olivia had seen in the east. I should get you back to town before it grows too late, Patrick said eventually, though his reluctance was evident. The ride back to Socorro was quiet, with Reverend and Mrs. Foster dozing in the back of Patrick's wagon while Olivia sat beside him on the driver's bench. The night air was cool, and Patrick had insisted she take his coat, which now enveloped her in his scent leather and soap and something uniquely him. Thank you for this evening, Olivia said as they approached the town limits. It was illuminating. Patrick glanced at her, the moonlight silvering his features. In what way? I feel I understand Socorro better now, and you. She hesitated, then added, I'd like to understand more. His smile was slow and warm. Then we'll have to arrange that, won't we? As summer gave way to autumn, Olivia and Patrick fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sunday dinners at his ranch became a regular occurrence, often with the Fosters or other friends in attendance. Patrick made a point of stopping by the schoolhouse several times a week, ostensibly to check on repairs or deliver books he thought might interest her students. For her part, Olivia found herself looking forward to these visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. She had not come to Sakura seeking romance, yet there was no denying the growing connection between them. The bridge reconstruction was finally completed in early October, and the town organized a celebration to mark the occasion. Tables were set up on the newly reinforced structure, and everyone in Sakura turned out for the feast and dancing. "It seems fitting that we should be celebrating here," Patrick said as he and Olivia stood at the center of the bridge, looking down at the now calm waters of the Rio Grande. "Where it all began." "Indeed," Olivia agreed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Though I admit I prefer crossing this bridge on foot rather than being carried." Patrick laughed. "You seemed content enough in my arms at the time." "I was terrified," she corrected him, though her smile belied her words, "and extremely grateful." "And now?" he asked, his tone suddenly serious. Olivia met his gaze steadily. "Now I find myself grateful in an entirely different way, for your friendship, your support with the school, your presence in my life." Patrick took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I've been thinking about what you said that first night at dinner about books opening worlds of possibility. You've done that for me, Olivia, shown me possibilities I hadn't considered." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What sorts of possibilities?" "A life shared," he said simply. "A partnership beyond friendship." Before Olivia could respond, they were interrupted by Thomas Caldwell, who had been watching them from the end of the bridge with growing irritation. "Miss Winters," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "I believe you promised me a dance." Olivia had done no such thing, but making a scene would only tarnish the celebration. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell, if you'll excuse us, Patrick." Patrick released her hand reluctantly, his expression carefully neutral as Caldwell led her away. "You shouldn't encourage him," Caldwell said as soon as they were out of earshot, steering her toward the makeshift dance floor. "I beg your pardon," Olivia replied, stiffening at his presumption. "Jameson," Caldwell clarified, as though speaking to a child. "He's not suitable company for a lady of your background and education. My father says he's reached the limit of what he can achieve here." A small ranch, a respected name in a backwater town, that's the extent of Patrick Jameson's prospects. "I wasn't aware that I required Mr. Caldwell's assessment of my friendships," Olivia said coolly. "Or yours." Thomas had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "I speak only out of concern. You're new to our ways. A woman alone in these territories needs guidance." "I've managed quite well thus far," Olivia pointed out. "And while I appreciate the community's support, I don't require supervision of my personal associations." They had reached the dance floor, where several couples were already moving to the music of fiddles and a battered piano that had been transported from the saloon. Thomas took Olivia's hand and waist, pulling her closer than propriety strictly allowed. "I could offer you so much more than he can," Thomas said, his voice low and intense. "My family has connections throughout the territory. We're building something significant here." "With the right wife at my side, Mr. Caldwell," Olivia interrupted firmly, "you presume too much. I have not given you any indication that I am seeking a husband, from Sakura or elsewhere. But surely that's why you came west. Women don't travel to places like this unless they're looking for opportunities not available to them back east, marriage being the primary one." Olivia pulled back, creating space between them despite Thomas's attempt to maintain their proximity. "I came to teach," she said clearly. "To build something of my own, not to attach myself to someone else's ambitions. And now, I believe this dance is over." She disengaged herself from his hold and walked away, ignoring the stares their interaction had drawn. She needed air, space to collect herself before facing the rest of the celebration. Olivia made her way to the far side of the bridge, away from the main festivities. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks as she leaned against the railing, looking out over the dark water below. "Are you all right?" She turned to find Patrick standing a respectful distance away, concern etched on his features. "Yes," she assured him. "Just needed a moment away from the crowd." He moved to stand beside her, not speaking, simply offering his presence. The silence between them was comfortable, a balm to her agitated spirits. "Mr. Caldwell seems to believe I came to Socorro in search of a husband," Olivia said finally, a hint of amusement in her voice. Patrick glanced at her. "And did you?" "No," she said honestly. "I came for independence, for the chance to build something meaningful. Marriage was the furthest thing from my mind." "Was?" Patrick noted her use of the past tense. Olivia took a deep breath. "Recent experiences have caused me to reconsider certain possibilities," she admitted, "though not in the way Mr. Caldwell might hope." Patrick turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers in the moonlight. "Olivia," he began, but was interrupted once again, this time by Sheriff Matthews, who approached with a concerned expression. "Jameson," he called, "there's trouble at the south end. Some of the men have had too much to drink, and there's talk of settling old scores. We need level heads." Patrick hesitated, clearly torn between duty and the moment at hand. "Go," Olivia urged him. "We can continue this conversation another time." With a nod, Patrick followed the sheriff, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts and the whisper of the river below. The near violence at the bridge celebration marked the beginning of a tense period in Socorro. Long, simmering disputes between ranchers over water rights and grazing boundaries threatened to erupt into open conflict as a dry autumn followed the earlier floods. Patrick found himself increasingly drawn into efforts to maintain peace, acting as mediator between factions due to his respected position in the community. These responsibilities limited his time with Olivia, though they exchanged notes regularly, and he still made a point of visiting the schoolhouse when he could. Their relationship existed in a state of suspension, both aware of deepening feelings, yet unable to fully explore them amid the town's troubles. As November arrived with unseasonable warmth, Olivia threw herself into preparations for the school's Christmas program. The performance had become a focal point for her students and the community, a welcome distraction from the growing tensions. One afternoon, as she was working late on the script, she heard horses approaching at speed. Looking up, she saw Patrick dismounting outside, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked as he entered, immediately concerned by his unusual arrival. "Fire at the Mendez ranch," he explained quickly. "They've lost their barn and most of their winter feed. The family's safe, but Rafael Mendez was badly burned trying to save their livestock." "How terrible," Olivia said, already reaching for her coat. "What can I do to help? Mrs. Mendez and the children need somewhere to stay while Rafael recovers at the doctor's." "I thought perhaps, of course they can stay here," Olivia said immediately. "The schoolhouse is large enough, and we can set up beds in the classroom." Patrick's relief was palpable. "I hoped you'd say that. They're on their way now with Reverend Foster. I need to get back to help with the fire, but I wanted to make arrangements for the family first." "Go," Olivia urged him. "I'll prepare everything here." He caught her hand briefly, squeezing it in gratitude before hurrying back to his horse. Olivia watched him ride away, admiration swelling in her chest for this man who consistently put others' needs before his own. The Mendez family arrived an hour later. Maria Mendez, stoic despite her evident exhaustion, and her 4 children, ranging from 13-year-old Elena to little Carlos, barely 4. Reverend Foster helped them settle in while Olivia prepared a simple meal from her own supplies. "How is Raphael?" Olivia asked Maria as they worked together to arrange bedding in the classroom. "The doctor says he will recover, but slowly," Maria replied, her English careful and precise. "The burns on his hands and arms are severe. He will not be able to work for many months." Olivia's heart ached for the family's plight. "You're welcome to stay here as long as needed," she assured the other woman. "We'll make it work." Maria gave her a grateful smile. "Patrick said you would help. He speaks highly of you, Miss Winters." "Olivia, please," she corrected gently. "And Patrick is a good friend." Maria's knowing look suggested she understood the relationship ran deeper than friendship, but she merely nodded. "We are fortunate to have good friends in Socorro." Later that evening, after the children were settled and Maria had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Olivia sat alone by the stove, reviewing the day's events. The Mendez family's situation was dire with their barn destroyed and Raphael injured. Their ranch's future was in jeopardy. A soft knock at the door roused her from these troubled thoughts. She opened it to find Patrick, his clothes and face smudged with soot, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You should be resting," she chided gently, pulling him inside out of the night chill. "I wanted to check on the family," he explained. "And on you." "We're managing," Olivia assured him, guiding him to a chair and pouring him a cup of coffee from the pot she kept warming on the stove. "How bad is it at the ranch?" Patrick accepted the coffee gratefully. "The barn's a total loss, along with most of their hay stores. We managed to save the house and about half the livestock, but without a place to shelter the animals through winter." He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what it meant for a ranching family to lose such essential infrastructure just before winter. "Could they rebuild quickly?" Olivia asked. Patrick shook his head. "Not with Raphael injured and not at this time of year. Even with help from neighbors, it would be a race against winter, and they'd still need to replace their feed supplies somehow." Olivia thought for a moment, then said slowly, "What if we organized a barn raising? The whole town coming together, not just the neighboring ranchers. If everyone contributed something, labor, materials, food for the workers, perhaps it could be done before the weather turns." Patrick looked at her with dawning hope. "It's possible. Ambitious, but possible. I could speak with the parents of my students, and you could approach the ranchers," Olivia continued, warming to the idea. "Reverend Foster would surely help coordinate through the church. Even Mr. Caldwell might contribute if approached correctly. His bank would benefit from the Mendez ranch surviving, after all." Patrick's tired face broke into a smile. "You're remarkable, you know that. You've been in Socorro less than 6 months and already you're thinking like a community builder." Olivia felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. "I merely recognize a need and a potential solution. The real work will fall to people like you." "People like us," Patrick corrected her. "Partners in this as in other things." The word partners hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate crisis. "Yes," Olivia agreed softly, "partners." Patrick reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "I should go. You need rest, and I'm hardly fit company in this state." But he made no move to leave, and Olivia made no move to withdraw her hand. "Stay a little longer," she suggested. "Tell me more about the Mendez family so I can better help them." Patrick nodded, and they talked quietly for another hour about the Mendezes, about the fire, about the challenges facing Socorro as winter approached. When he finally rose to leave, Olivia walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Patrick asked, genuinely puzzled. "For including me. For seeing me as someone who can contribute, not just as a school teacher. An Eastern transplant, Patrick suggested when she trailed off. A woman to be protected rather than collaborated with, Olivia clarified. Patrick's expression softened. I learned long ago not to underestimate people based on society's expectations. You've proven yourself a valuable member of this community, Olivia. Anyone who fails to see that is a fool. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Good night, Patrick. He caught her hand as she began to pull away, his eyes dark with an emotion that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might pull her closer, but instead he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Olivia, he replied, his voice rough with restrained feeling. Sweet dreams. The Mendez barn raising became a rallying point for Sakuro, temporarily setting aside the tensions that had been building throughout the territory. Patrick and Olivia worked tirelessly to coordinate the effort, their partnership cementing both the project's success and their deepening relationship. By mid-November, construction was underway, with men from town and surrounding ranches contributing labor, women organizing meals for the workers, and even the children helping where they could. Rafael Mendez, his hands still heavily bandaged but his spirit unbroken, directed operations from a chair placed in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Your Miss Winters is quite the organizer, Rafael commented to Patrick as they watched Olivia efficiently dispatching a group of women to various tasks. Sakuro is fortunate she chose our town. She's not my Miss Winters, Patrick replied automatically, though without conviction. Rafael raised an eyebrow. No, the whole town says otherwise. The town says many things, Patrick said dryly. True, Rafael conceded. But in this case they see what is plain before them. Two people who look at each other as you look at her and she at you. In my country, we would already be planning the wedding feast. Patrick couldn't help but smile at his friend's directness. It's complicated, Rafael. Olivia came here for independence, not to tie herself to a man and a ranch. Perhaps, Rafael said thoughtfully. But independence does not preclude connection. My Maria is the strongest, most independent woman I know, and yet we are stronger together than apart. The right partner doesn't diminish your freedom, they expand your possibilities. Patrick considered these words as he watched Olivia move among the workers, her competence and compassion equally evident as she offered encouragement here, practical assistance there. She caught his eye across the construction site and smiled, a private gesture amid the public activity that warmed him to his core. You may have a point, Patrick admitted to Rafael. The older man chuckled. Of course I do. Now go help your woman before she decides she can raise this barn without you. The barn raising progressed quickly, with the framework completed in just 3 days of concentrated effort. On the 4th day, as they prepared to raise the roof beams, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Storm coming, Sheriff Matthews observed, glancing nervously at the sky. Big one by the look of it. If we don't get this roof on today, everything we've done could be ruined, Patrick said, assessing their progress. We need to pick up the pace. Word spread quickly among the workers, and everyone redoubled their efforts. Olivia organized the children to bring water and tools to the men working on the structure, keeping them hydrated and supplied without interrupting their labor. The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as the final roof beam was secured. A cheer went up from the assembled workers, quickly followed by a scramble to cover the structure with the tarpaulins they had prepared for this purpose. Patrick was directing a group of men securing the western edge when a sudden gust of wind tore one of the large tarps free. Without hesitation, he climbed the scaffolding to recapture it before it could blow away entirely. Olivia watched in alarm as Patrick balanced precariously on the wooden framework, now slick with rain, reaching for the flapping tarpaulin. The wind was strengthening by the minute, the storm advancing more quickly than anticipated. "Patrick, be careful," she called out, her voice nearly lost in the rising gale. He secured one corner of the tarp, tying it firmly to the beam, then made his way along the narrow wooden support to reach the other corner. As he stretched out to grab it, his foot slipped on the rain-slick wood. Olivia's heart stopped as Patrick lost his balance, arms windmilling for a terrible moment before he managed to catch hold of a vertical support. The tarp, now secured at only one point, whipped violently in the wind, striking him across the face. "Get down from there, Jameson," Sheriff Matthews shouted. "It's not worth your neck." But Patrick, with characteristic determination, secured his footing and made another attempt, successfully catching and tying down the second corner of the tarp. Only then did he begin his careful descent, moving from beam to beam with deliberate caution despite the now pouring rain. Olivia couldn't breathe until his boots hit solid ground. She rushed to his side, heedless of the mud and rain. "That was foolhardy," she scolded, her fear manifesting as anger. "You could have been killed." Patrick wiped rain from his eyes, a cut on his cheek where the tarp had struck him beginning to bleed. "The whole structure would have been at risk if that tarp blew away," he explained calmly. "It had to be secured. And you had to be the one to do it," Olivia demanded, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket to press against his cheek. "I was closest," he said simply, as though that explained everything, and perhaps it did. That was who Patrick Jameson was, the man who stepped forward when something needed doing, regardless of the risk to himself. It was what had drawn her to him from the beginning, from that first crossing of the flooded bridge. The rain was coming down in sheets now, everyone hurrying to gather their tools and take shelter. Patrick caught Olivia's elbow, guiding her toward the Mendez house, which had been repaired and cleaned in preparation for the family's return. "Everyone inside," Raphael called from the doorway, where he stood supported by his oldest son. "Maria has coffee and food ready." The workers crowded into the modest home, bringing with them the smell of rain and honest sweat. Despite the storm raging outside, the atmosphere was celebratory. They had accomplished what many had thought impossible, rebuilding the barn in time to shelter the Mendez livestock through winter. Olivia found herself pressed close to Patrick in the crowded room, their wet clothes touching. He still held her handkerchief to his cheek, though the bleeding appeared to have stopped. "You're shivering," he observed, concern replacing the earlier exhilaration in his eyes. "I'm fine," she assured him, though she couldn't quite control the tremors running through her body, partly from the cold, partly from the lingering fear of watching him on those rain-slick beams. Patrick frowned, then shrugged out of his coat, which somehow remained drier than the rest of him, and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth and weight of it, carrying his scent, enveloped her immediately. "Better?" he asked softly. Olivia nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This man, who risked himself for others without hesitation, who noticed her shivering amid a room full of people celebrating their collective achievement, who looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. How had he become so essential to her in such a short time? The storm continued through the afternoon and into the evening, trapping the barn raisers at the Mendez ranch. Arrangements were made for the women and children to sleep in the house, while the men would bunk in the newly constructed barn. As night fell, Olivia found herself helping Maria Mendez prepare bedding for their unexpected guests. "You and Patrick," Maria said conversationally as they worked, "you have not yet spoken of marriage." Olivia nearly dropped the blanket she was folding. That is, we haven't discussed it formally, no. Maria nodded as though this confirmed something she had suspected. But you love him, she stated matter-of-factly. It wasn't a question, and Olivia didn't treat it as one. Yes, she admitted the first time she had said it aloud, even to herself. I do. And he loves you, Maria continued. This is clear to everyone, but perhaps you too. Olivia smiled wryly. It's complicated. Love always is, Maria agreed readily, but it is also simple. Two people who are better together than apart, what could be simpler than that? Put that way, it did seem straightforward. Yet Olivia's New England upbringing and her own carefully cultivated independence made her hesitate at the precipice of such a commitment. I came to Sakura to build something of my own, she explained, to be more than someone's wife or daughter. And you have done this, Maria pointed out. The school thrives under your care. The children adore you. The town respects you not as Patrick's woman, but as Olivia Winters, the teacher who organized a barn raising and carried water to thirsty men in the rain. Olivia considered this perspective. It was true that she had established herself in Sakura independently of her connection to Patrick. Her relationship with him had grown alongside her role in the community, not in place of it. Patrick would never ask you to be less than you are, Maria added gently. This is why he has not spoken, I think. He fears you would see marriage as a constraint rather than a partnership. Before Olivia could respond, they were interrupted by Elena Mendez, bringing word that the men had the barn secure and were settling in for the night. The conversation shifted to practical matters of blankets and pillows, but Maria's words remained with Olivia as she prepared for sleep. Love is also simple. Two people who are better together than apart. The storm passed during the night, leaving a washed, clean world and a rainbow arcing over Sakura as the residents made their way back to town the following morning. Patrick rode alongside the wagon carrying Olivia and several other women, occasional glances passing between them that said more than words could convey. They reached Sakura to find that the storm had caused minor damage throughout the town, a few blown-down signs, some flooding in the lower areas, but nothing catastrophic. The new bridge had held firm, a testament to the improved construction. As they crossed into town, Patrick guided his horse closer to the wagon. "Would you join me for dinner tonight?" he asked Olivia quietly. "At my ranch, just the two of us this time." The significance of the invitation and the specification that they would be alone was not lost on Olivia. This would not be their usual Sunday dinner with the Fosters or other guests. This would be something else entirely. "Yes," she replied simply. "I'd like that." Patrick's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'll come for you at 6, he said, then urged his horse ahead to speak with Sheriff Matthews, who was assessing damage near the church. Olivia watched him go, her heart both light and heavy with anticipation. Tonight, she sensed, would mark a turning point in their relationship one way or another. The hours until evening passed with excruciating slowness. Olivia attended to her responsibilities at the school, where the Mendez children had already returned to their studies, despite the family's recent hardships. She found herself checking the clock frequently, her thoughts continually straying to the evening ahead. What would Patrick say? What would she say in response? The uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock came at her door. Olivia took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, the blue one he had complimented once, and opened the door to find Patrick standing there, freshly shaven and dressed in his best clothes, a small bouquet of late wildflowers in his hand. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering her the flowers. "Thank you," she replied, accepting them with a smile. "These must be the last blooms of the season." "I had to search a bit," he admitted, "but I wanted to bring you something." The gesture touched her deeply, that he had taken the time to find flowers for her when there were surely 100 more practical concerns demanding his attention after the storm. The ride to his ranch was filled with comfortable conversation about the barn raising, the storm's aftermath, and plans for the school's Christmas program. Yet beneath this everyday discussion ran a current of anticipation, a shared awareness that this evening was different from those that had come before. Mrs. Garcia had outdone herself with dinner, a perfectly roasted chicken, vegetables from Patrick's garden, and fresh bread that filled the house with its comforting aroma. She served them efficiently and then, with a knowing smile at Patrick, announced that she would be visiting her sister in town that evening and would return in the morning. "She's not very subtle, is she?" Olivia observed with a small laugh after the housekeeper had departed. "Mrs. Garcia has been trying to see me settled for years," Patrick admitted ruefully. "She's beside herself with hope that you might be the one to accomplish what she considers her life's mission." "And is that what you want?" Olivia asked, suddenly direct. "To be settled?" Patrick considered the question seriously. "Not in the way she means it, perhaps. I've been content with my life, my ranch, my place in Socorro, but since you arrived—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I've realized that contentment isn't the same as happiness, and that what I thought was independence might actually have been isolation." He reached across the table to take her hand, his touch sending warmth coursing through her. "You've changed how I see my life, Olivia. What seemed enough before now feels incomplete without you in it." Olivia's heart raced at his words, so closely echoing her own thoughts. "I came to Socorro seeking independence," she said slowly. "I wanted to prove to myself as much as to anyone that I could build a meaningful life on my own terms." "And you have," Patrick assured her quickly. "What you've accomplished with the school, how you've connected with this community, that's all you're doing." "But not entirely on my own," Olivia acknowledged. "You've been beside me through much of it, supporting without controlling, suggesting without demanding. I've never felt diminished by your help, only enhanced." Patrick's eyes never left hers. "That's all I would ever want to be in your life, someone who helps you become more fully yourself, not less." "Partners," Olivia said softly, echoing their earlier conversation. "In all things," Patrick agreed, "if that's what you want." The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility. Then, with deliberate grace, Olivia rose from her chair and moved around the table to stand before Patrick. He turned in his seat to face her, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Olivia took his hands in hers. "When you carried me across that bridge," she said, "I was terrified not just of the flood, but of being so completely dependent on someone else. I've spent my whole life striving for self-sufficiency, believing that needing others was a weakness." Patrick listened intently, his thumbs tracing gentle patterns on her hands. "But I've learned something in Socorro," Olivia continued. "True strength isn't found in isolation. It's found in knowing when to lean on others and when to be the one providing support. It's found in partnership." She took a deep breath, then said clearly, "I love you, Patrick Jameson, and I would be honored to cross whatever life brings us together." Patrick stood, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his physical strength. "I love you, Olivia Winters," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought it possible to love anyone." Their first kiss was tentative, a question and answer exchanged without words. The second was deeper, a promise sealed between them. When they finally parted, Olivia rested her head against Patrick's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. Olivia looked up at him, her answer clear in her eyes before she spoke it aloud. "Yes." Patrick's joy was incandescent as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with pure happiness. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this for weeks," he admitted, opening it to reveal a delicate ring with a single pearl nestled in a setting of gold. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, saying it should go to the woman who would be my partner in all things." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as Patrick slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. They spent the evening planning their future a spring wedding after the worst of winter had passed, but before the demands of the ranching season began in earnest. Olivia would continue teaching, dividing her time between the school and the ranch. They spoke of children, of expanding the ranch house, of dreams both practical and fanciful. "There will be challenges," Patrick acknowledged as they stood on his porch later that evening, reluctant to end their time together despite the late hour. "The ranch requires constant attention. The school will continue to need your leadership. We'll have to find a balance that works for both of us." "We'll figure it out together," Olivia assured him, echoing his words from that first crossing. "That's what partners do." Patrick smiled, drawing her close for one more kiss before they made their way to the wagon that would take Olivia back to town. "Together," he agreed. "Always." News of their engagement spread through Socorro with predictable speed. By the time Patrick escorted Olivia to church the following Sunday, the entire town was aware of their upcoming nuptials. They were met with a chorus of congratulations, genuine delight from most quarters, and only thinly veiled disappointment from Thomas Caldwell and a few local young women who had harbored hopes regarding the eligible rancher. "I feel like we should be thanking everyone," Olivia whispered to Patrick as they made their way through well-wishers. "The whole town seems to take credit for our match," Patrick chuckled. "Socorro does love a good romance, especially when they believe they orchestrated it. Didn't they, though?" Olivia teased. "Mrs. Wheeler assures me she knew from the moment you carried me across that bridge that we were destined to marry." "Ah, but she didn't know I'd fallen in love with you the minute you started arguing about saving your books during a flood," Patrick countered, his eyes warm with affection. "That's when I knew you were a woman of substance, more concerned with knowledge than comfort." Olivia felt a blush rising in her cheeks. "And here I thought I'd made a terrible first impression, being so helpless on the wrong side of the river." "Never helpless," Patrick corrected her. "Just temporarily stranded. There's a difference." Their conversation was interrupted by Reverend Foster, who approached with his wife and a beaming Mrs. Garcia. "I hear congratulations are in order," the Reverend said, clasping Patrick's hand warmly. "Though I must say it's about time. Mrs. Foster and I were beginning to wonder if we'd need to lock you two in the church cellar until you came to your senses." "Robert," Mrs. Foster admonished, though her eyes twinkled with amusement, "what my husband means to say is that we're delighted for you both. You're well suited." "The perfect match," Mrs. Garcia agreed emphatically. "Now we just need to plan the wedding. Spring, I understand. That gives us plenty of time to prepare. Miss Winters, Olivia, you must come to dinner this week so we can discuss the details." Olivia exchanged an amused glance with Patrick at the housekeeper's enthusiasm. "That would be lovely, Mrs. Garcia. Though we're planning something simple." "Nonsense," Mrs. Garcia interrupted. "The most respected rancher and our beloved schoolteacher. Socorro will expect a celebration worthy of the occasion." As the older woman launched into a detailed description of possible wedding arrangements, Patrick leaned close to whisper in Olivia's ear, "We could always elope." Olivia stifled a laugh. "Don't tempt me." But in truth, she found herself looking forward to celebrating their union with the community that had become her home. These people, from Reverend Foster to Mrs. Garcia to the Mendez family and her students, had embraced her, supported her, and now shared in her happiness. It was fitting that they should be part of the day that would formalize her and Patrick's commitment to each other. The months leading up to their spring wedding passed in a blur of preparations, both for the ceremony and for their future life together. Olivia began the gradual process of moving her belongings to the ranch, bringing books and personal items with each visit. Patrick, meanwhile, undertook renovations to the ranch house, expanding what would become their shared bedroom and creating a small library where Olivia could work on school matters when at home. Winter descended on Socorro with unusual severity that year, bringing snowstorms that isolated the town for days at a time. Patrick made a point of checking on Olivia whenever the weather permitted, often bringing supplies and staying to share a meal before braving the cold journey back to his ranch. During one such visit in late January, as they sat before the stove in Olivia's small quarters, Patrick broached a subject they had discussed only in general terms before. "I've been thinking about children," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Olivia set aside the lesson plans she had been reviewing. "Oh, I know we've said we want them," Patrick continued, "but I realized we've never talked about when or how many or, well, any of the details." Olivia smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness in bringing up the topic now, rather than assuming they would simply let nature take its course after their wedding. "I would like children," she confirmed, "though perhaps not immediately. I'd like some time for just us, and to find our balance between the school and the ranch." Patrick nodded, relief evident in his expression. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. Not that I wouldn't be happy if we were blessed right away," he added quickly. "But I'm selfish enough to want you to myself for a while." "And as for how many," Olivia prompted, curious about his thoughts. "I was an only child," Patrick said reflectively. "It was lonely at times, especially on the ranch. I'd like our children to have siblings if possible." "I agree," Olivia said warmly. "I have 2 sisters, and despite our differences, I value those relationships deeply. Perhaps 2 or 3 children, spaced far enough apart that we can give each one proper attention." 2 or 3 sounds perfect," Patrick agreed, reaching out to take her hand. "But for now, I'm content to practice being a husband before taking on fatherhood." Olivia blushed at his implication, but squeezed his hand in agreement. "A wise approach, Mr. Jameson." As winter gradually released its grip on Socorro, wedding preparations intensified. Olivia's dress arrived from Santa Fe, a creation of ivory satin, and lace that Mrs. Foster declared the finest gown ever seen in the territory. Patrick, under strict instructions from Mrs. Garcia, ordered a new suit from the same establishment. The entire town seemed involved in the preparations. The women of Socorro organized a quilting bee to create a wedding gift, while the men collaborated on building a new buggy that would belong to the couple. Olivia's students prepared a special musical performance for the reception, practicing diligently under the direction of Mrs. Wheeler, who had some musical training. 2 weeks before the wedding, as Olivia was supervising the children's rehearsal in the schoolhouse, a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw a stage coach had arrived unusual, as it wasn't the regular day for the stage. Her curiosity turned to shock when the door opened and a familiar figure descended. "Class, continue practicing with Mrs. Wheeler," Olivia instructed hurriedly. "I need to step outside for a moment." She hurried out the door, hardly believing her eyes. "Mother, Father, what are you doing here?" Elizabeth and William Winters stood beside the stagecoach, looking travel-worn but determined. Elizabeth stepped forward first, embracing her daughter stiffly. Did you truly believe we would allow our daughter to marry without her family present? She asked, a hint of reproach in her voice. Olivia returned the embrace, her mind racing. She had written to her family about her engagement, of course, but their replies had been cool at best. Her father had expressed concerns about the hasty nature of the match and the unsuitability of a frontier rancher as a husband for an educated Bostonian woman. Her mother had lamented Olivia's distance from home and proper society. Neither had indicated any intention to attend the wedding. I didn't think you approved, Olivia said honestly. Your letters suggested you had reservations. William Winters cleared his throat uncomfortably. We had concerns, he acknowledged. We still do. But your sister Margaret convinced us that we should at least meet this man before passing judgment. Olivia glanced beyond her parents, suddenly realizing that a third passenger had descended from the stage coach, her younger sister Margaret, who now rushed forward to embrace her enthusiastically. "Surprise!" Margaret exclaimed. "I couldn't let you get married without at least one supportive family member present, and since I couldn't convince you to return to Boston for the ceremony, I convinced them to come to Socorro instead." Olivia hugged her sister tightly, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." "Well, aren't you going to introduce us to your students?" Elizabeth asked, gesturing toward the schoolhouse where curious faces now pressed against the windows. "And then perhaps you can direct us to suitable accommodations." "The journey has been most fatiguing." Olivia gathered herself, slipping back into the role of daughter even as she maintained her position as Socorro's schoolteacher. "Of course. Let me introduce you to Mrs. Wheeler first, who has been kindly helping with the wedding preparations, and then we'll get you settled." The arrival of the Winters family set Socorro abuzz with fresh excitement. Accommodations were quickly arranged at the small hotel, which, while modest by Boston standards, was the finest the town had to offer. Olivia found herself caught between worlds, her established life in Socorro and the pull of her family's expectations. "You must bring your young man to dinner tonight," Elizabeth instructed as they parted at the hotel. "We are most eager to meet the man who has captured your heart so decisively." Olivia nodded, anxiety building at the thought of Patrick meeting her parents. They came from such different worlds. Would they find any common ground? Would her father's obvious reservations color their interaction? Would Patrick feel judged and found wanting? These concerns preoccupied her throughout the afternoon as she completed her teaching day. When Patrick arrived at the schoolhouse, as had become his custom, she blurted out the news before he could even dismount. "My family is here. My parents and my sister Margaret. They arrived on today's stage." Patrick's expression registered surprise, followed quickly by understanding. "I see. That's unexpected. They want to meet you tonight, dinner at the hotel." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I'm sorry, I know it's sudden, but they insisted," and Olivia, Patrick interrupted gently, dismounting and approaching her. "Breathe, it's all right. Of course I'll have dinner with your family." "You don't understand," Olivia said, wringing her hands. "My father has very fixed ideas about, well, everything. And my mother is the most proper woman in Boston. They're going to judge you and us, and this place." Patrick took her hands in his, stilling their nervous movement. "Let them judge," he said calmly. "Their opinion doesn't change what we know to be true, that we love each other, that we've built something real here, that Socorro is your home now as much as Boston ever was." His confidence steadied her. "You're right, of course. I'm being ridiculous." "Not ridiculous," Patrick corrected her. "Just concerned for the people you care about, me and your family. That's one of the things I love about you." Olivia rose on tiptoe to kiss him, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "Thank you for understanding and for being willing to face the Winters family interrogation." "I've faced stampeding cattle and armed outlaws," Patrick replied with a wink. "How bad could dinner with your parents be?" "Quite bad, as it turned out." William Winters was polite but cool, asking pointed questions about Patrick's ranch, his education, his prospects. Elizabeth was equally reserved, her Boston manners preventing outright rudeness but not disguising her assessment of Patrick as unsuitable for her daughter. Only Margaret seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Patrick, asking about his life in Socorro and how he and Olivia had met. "So you literally carried her across a flooding river?" Margaret asked, delighted by the romantic image. "Like something from a novel." "It was a bridge, not the river itself," Patrick clarified, "though it was certainly dramatic enough at the time." "And what did you say to her?" Margaret pressed, ignoring her mother's subtle signals to change the subject. Patrick glanced at Olivia, his eyes warm with the memory. "I told her we would cross everything together, the flood, the bridge, whatever else life brought our way." "How poetic," Margaret sighed appreciatively. "How impulsive," William commented more dryly. "A sentiment expressed in the heat of the moment is hardly a foundation for marriage." "Father," Olivia began, but Patrick laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Mr. Winters," he said respectfully, "I understand your concerns. From your perspective, this match appears hasty and perhaps ill-considered. But I assure you, my feelings for your daughter are not impulsive or fleeting. I have come to know Olivia's character, her intelligence, her strength. She has built a place for herself in Socorro through her own merit, earning the respect of everyone from the wealthiest rancher to the poorest farmhand's children. I love her not despite her independence, but because of it." William Winters studied Patrick for a long moment, then turned to his daughter. "And you, Olivia, are you certain this is what you want? A life so far from everything familiar, from the opportunities Boston could offer?" Olivia met her father's gaze steadily. "I'm creating new opportunities here, Father. The school is flourishing. There's talk of expanding it next year to accommodate more students. Patrick supports my work completely. He's even building a library in our home so I can continue my studies and prepare lessons." "A library?" Elizabeth repeated, the first hint of approval entering her voice. "How progressive." "It was Patrick's idea," Olivia added, sensing a potential softening in her mother's attitude. "He's quite well read himself. Reverend Foster's predecessor took an interest in his education years ago." Patrick smiled modestly. "I had a natural curiosity, and Reverend Johnson had a library he was willing to share. It opened worlds to me that I wouldn't have known otherwise." The conversation shifted then to books and education, ground on which Patrick could more than hold his own. By the time dessert was served, a tentative truce seemed to have been established. William still had reservations, but he was at least willing to acknowledge Patrick's intelligence and evident devotion to Olivia. Elizabeth remained concerned about the practicalities of frontier life, but was somewhat reassured by Patrick's description of the ranch house and the modern conveniences he had incorporated. As they parted for the evening, William drew Patrick aside for a private word. "I still believe my daughter could have made a more advantageous match in Boston," he said bluntly. "But I cannot deny that she seems genuinely happy here and with you. That counts for something." "It counts for everything to me," Patrick replied with equal directness. "I promise you, sir, that I will spend my life ensuring she never regrets her choice." William nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to reserve judgment. "See that you do, young man. See that you do." The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding saw a gradual thawing in relations between Patrick and the Winters family. William, despite his initial reservations, found himself impressed by the respect Patrick commanded in Socorro and by the evident quality of his ranch operation. Elizabeth, while still lamenting the lack of proper society, was won over by the genuine warmth of Socorro's women, who welcomed her into their wedding preparations with open arms. Margaret, for her part, thrived in the frontier setting, charming everyone from the gruff sheriff to the shy Mendez children with her unaffected enthusiasm. She spent hours with Olivia, helping with final wedding arrangements and absorbing stories of her sister's life in the territory. "I see why you stayed," Margaret confided as they worked together on place cards for the wedding feast. "There's a freedom here that Boston lacks. People value you for what you do, not who your grandfather was or how much money you have." "Exactly," Olivia agreed, grateful for her sister's understanding. "Though I do miss certain things, museums, concerts, proper bookshops. But you gain so much in exchange," Margaret pointed out. "And Patrick, Olivia, he looks at you as though you hung the moon and stars." "I don't think I've ever seen a man so completely in love." Olivia felt a blush warming her cheeks. "I feel the same about him. It's not what I expected when I came west, but it's everything I could want now." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, the New Mexico spring offering its finest weather for the occasion. The church was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, every pew filled with Socorro residents dressed in their Sunday best. Patrick stood at the altar with Reverend Foster, his usual composure betraying hints of nervous anticipation. William Winters, whatever his lingering doubts, performed his fatherly duty with dignity, escorting Olivia down the aisle with evident pride. The collective intake of breath as the congregation got their first glimpse of the bride in her ivory gown was audible throughout the small church. But Patrick noticed nothing except Olivia's face, radiant with joy as their eyes met across the aisle. In that moment, all the preparations, all the family tensions, all the practical concerns about their future faded into insignificance. There was only this woman, this extraordinary woman, walking toward a life they would build together. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and confident as they promised to love and cherish one another through all of life's joys and challenges. When Reverend Foster pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. The celebration that followed at the town hall was everything Mrs. Garcia had promised, a true community event where social distinctions were set aside in favor of shared joy. The Mendez family, now fully recovered from the winter's disaster, provided music that had everyone from children to elders dancing. The women of Socorro had outdone themselves with the feast, incorporating traditional New Mexican dishes alongside more familiar fare for the Eastern visitors. As the celebration continued into the evening, Patrick drew Olivia outside for a moment of quiet beneath the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Jameson?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood in the cool spring air. "Completely," Olivia assured him, leaning back against his chest. "Though I may continue using Miss Winters professionally if you don't mind." "The children are used to it, and you've built your reputation under that name," Patrick finished for her. "I understand completely. You're still Olivia Winters, teacher extraordinaire to Socorro, and Olivia Jameson, my beloved wife to me." She turned in his arms to face him, touched by his immediate acceptance. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," Patrick replied with a smile, "but I wouldn't object to hearing it again." "I love you, Patrick Jameson," Olivia said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," he returned, his voice husky with emotion. "My partner in all things." They returned to their celebration hand in hand, stepping back into the warmth and light of the town hall where their friends and family awaited. The road ahead would have its challenges, as all lives do, but they would face them together just as Patrick had promised that day on the flooded bridge. 10 years later, Patrick and Olivia Jameson stood on the new iron bridge that spanned the Rio Grande. Their 3 children gathered around them. 8-year-old Henry, named for Patrick's father, pointed excitedly at the rushing water below. 6-year-old Elizabeth, who had her grandmother's proper bearing but her mother's independent spirit, held tightly to Olivia's hand. And 3-year-old James, a miniature version of his father, sat securely on Patrick's shoulders. "And this is where Papa carried Mama across during the flood," Henry explained to his younger siblings, repeating the story he'd heard countless times. "He said they would cross everything together, and they have." "That's right," Patrick confirmed, reaching out to ruffle his son's hair. "Best decision I ever made, carrying your mother to safety." "I thought asking her to marry you was your best decision," Elizabeth pointed out with the precise logic she'd inherited from both parents. "They're connected," Olivia explained, exchanging a warm glance with her husband. One led to the other. Socorro had grown in the decade since their wedding. The school now occupied a proper building with 3 classrooms and a small library, largely funded by a grant from the Winters Family Foundation, established by William before his passing 3 years earlier. Elizabeth Winters had relocated to New Mexico after her husband's death, building a small house near her daughter's family and becoming an integral part of Socorro society. The Jameson Ranch had prospered as well, expanding its operations under Patrick's careful management. Olivia continued to teach, balancing her professional responsibilities with her role as mother and ranch wife, with Patrick's unwavering support. Their partnership had weathered its share of challenges drought years that threatened the ranch, political disputes over the school curriculum, the difficulty of Margaret's death during a typhoid outbreak that had swept through the territory. Through it all, they had remained each other's strength, crossing each obstacle together as promised. "Can we go to the bookshop now?" Henry asked eagerly. The establishment was Socorro's newest addition, a source of immense pride for Olivia, who had helped the owner select the initial inventory. "Yes, and then ice cream," Patrick promised, to enthusiastic cheers from all 3 children. As they walked across the bridge toward town, James still perched on his father's shoulders and the older children running ahead, Olivia slipped her hand into Patrick's. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been if that bridge hadn't flooded that day?" she asked contemplatively. Patrick considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Some connections seem destined, don't they? But I'm grateful for that flood all the same. It gave me the courage to approach you directly, rather than admiring you from afar as I'd been doing since you arrived in Socorro." "You were admiring me from afar?" Olivia asked, surprised even after all these years. "I had no idea." Patrick laughed. "You were the beautiful, educated Easterner who had the whole town talking. Of course, I noticed you. I just didn't think I had anything to offer someone like you, until that moment on the bridge when you looked at me not as the rancher or the cowboy, but just as the man who was there when you needed someone. You've been there every time I've needed someone since," Olivia said softly. "And I hope I've done the same for you." "More than you know," Patrick assured her, stopping to press a kiss to her forehead. "We've built something remarkable here, Olivia, not just the ranch or your school, but our family, our place in this community. Everything we've crossed together has made us stronger. Mama, Papa, hurry up." Elizabeth called from further ahead, impatient with their lingering. Olivia laughed, tugging Patrick forward. Our public awaits. Shall we cross this bridge and see what adventures lie on the other side? With you. Patrick replied, his love for her as evident now as it had been on their wedding day. Always. Hand in hand, they followed their children into Sakaro's bustling main street, continuing the journey they had begun on a flood-threatened bridge a decade before, a journey of partnership, purpose, and enduring love.